Hey, I'd like to thank you all for coming to the third webinar we have in our fall series for the Executive Farm Management Program. Today, I'm happy to have Keri Pearlson and Lisa DeCarlo to do a discussion of cybersecurity issues that we need to be aware of in the agriculture industry today. I'd like to go ahead and just turn this over to Lisa. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Michael. Well, we are lucky to have Keri here today. Keri is the Executive Director of Cybersecurity at MIT Sloan School of Management. She's based in Austin, Texas. She holds a doctorate in business administration and management information systems from Harvard, and a master's in industrial engineering and a bachelor's in mathematics from Stanford. So she's covered all of the academic bases. Her research has spanned management information systems, business strategy, organizational design, but her current research really studies how organizations build a culture of cybersecurity and how organizations build trust to share mitigations for cyber breaches. She has authored all kinds of articles. She is published all over the place. And the other thing is that you'd be thrilled to know, she also works with businesses on a very regular basis. She has her own consulting company called KP Partners. It's a CIO or Chief Information Officer advisory services firm and a technology leaders forum. So we have got one of the best and leading experts we could have here to talk with all of you today about cybersecurity. So welcome, Keri.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate being here. It's awesome. And I look forward to talking about cybersecurity for your audience.
Fantastic. Well, why don't we dive in? We're going to start some questions, but if anyone comes up with a question in the crowd, we're happy to pull that in as well. So Keri, let's start with some basics. Why is cybersecurity such a big issue for companies today?
You know, it's a big issue because we like to say at our research group at MIT, the bad guys are getting badder faster than the good guys are getting better. It's really hard to keep up. We have to lock every window and every door. We have to make sure every piece of equipment is protected. Every person in our organization knows what to do. Every system that we have has as much technology protection as well as resiliency as possible. The bad guys only have to find one crack. They just have to get in. And that could be through a number of different ways, whether it's a phishing email or an unsafe system or an unpatched technology. And so while it's not easy to hack into our systems, there's just so many opportunities for people who have bad intentions to find ways into our systems. So it's a big issue, not just for large companies, but even more so for small and medium businesses. We've spun up a couple of research projects at MIT on looking at small and medium businesses in the supply chain. I'm happy to tell you more about that too, if you'd like. But it turns out that many small and medium businesses, they don't have the protections in place. They don't have the resiliency plans in place that big companies do. They look at themselves and they say, why would someone attack me when they could attack a big guy? You can make much more money with a big guy. Well, the truth is they attack the small and medium businesses because the protections are less. It's easier to get in the door. And the ransomware, the disruption, the kinds of things we see are just as disruptive and just as lucrative to the bad guys when it's a small business versus when it's a large business. So it's a problem for everybody. It's a problem at the individual level. They want to get into our bank accounts and our personal bank accounts. It's a problem for small and medium businesses, and it's a problem for large companies.
So you made the point specifically around small and medium-sized businesses, but do you think that even extends to farms? I mean, when you talked about locking all the doors, I'm sure a lot of people aren't even worried about locking their doors.
Well, it's true. But, when you think about a farm, certainly many of them are small businesses, medium businesses, but some are quite large organizations. And there's a couple of I guess, developments in the farm industry. I'm not an expert in farm industry, but in preparing for this talk today, I did a little bit of background research, and I learned that there are all sorts of new agri-technologies coming out there. And every time there's a new technology, there's a new vulnerability, maybe multiple vulnerabilities. And so when we think about the motivation for the hackers, it could be to hold something ransom. And we've seen an increase in agricultural applications and agricultural systems that could open up a vulnerability where it would make a ransomware situation would make a farm have to pay in order to get their systems back online. In particular, I was reading about at the planting time and at the harvest time. Those are really big opportunities, and there's a limited amount of time that the farmer has to perform the business processes they need to perform. And if those business processes are based in technology today, whether it's the agricultural manufacturing or harvesting equipment or the information system behind that to keep track of things, they're going to pay the ransom because they want to get back online. They can't afford to sit around and figure out how to get back online. So high situational vulnerability, high technology vulnerability, and urgency. And those are a perfect storm for the bad guys to try to be disruptive. Then we've got all of the just general disruptive people who want to be disruptive just because they have a point to make. They don't like whatever agricultural tool policies or the way that a farm might be doing something. They might like your practices, and so they want to come and disrupt your business because you represent something that is counter to the way that they believe. It's not so much about holding you ransom for money. It's about disrupting your business so you can't do whatever it is that that they don't want you to do. And so we've got all sorts of opportunities that just create vulnerability after vulnerability. So I think farms are ripe for worrying about how to be protected and how to be resilient.
Okay, now that we have everyone sufficiently worried.
Sorry, I wish I had good news. And I do have some good news, and we have some ways to think about this, but I do think that there is a need. And that's, I think small and medium business owners, particularly often think that they're just not going to be victims. I mean, we don't individually, that we see in the physical security space, the time people mostly buy household alarms is after their house has been broken in, because they don't think they're a victim. And then all of a sudden they're a victim and they're like, oh, I got to go do something about this. So we're seeing that in the cybersecurity space also. Companies just don't really think it's going to affect them. And then it does affect them. And then they're like, oh, now what do I do? And I want people to be thinking about it ahead of time. I want them resilient. I don't want them just protected. I want them resilient. I want, if there's a cyber attack, they're able to get back in operation quickly, or it doesn't even affect them because they've thought through this ahead of time.
All right, well, good. So how do we help companies think about becoming more secure?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there are a lot of things to do. There's a model that we talk about often in our work at MIT that was put out by the US government, National Institute of Standards and Technology, and we call it the NIST model. It's the NIST Cybersecurity Framework Model. And you can look it up online, and there's tons and tons of articles and things to read about that. But what I like about this model is it helps you think about how to build a cybersecurity strategy. So you think about your business strategy, you've thought through what are the different components, where's your revenue coming from, what other resources do you need to be able to carry out your business. It's the same kind of thing for cybersecurity. We want a plan. Most people think that it's about putting protections in place. The more protections I have in place, the more secure I am. But today, it's a broader spectrum than that. We want to understand, what are our key assets? What do we want to protect? What's important to us? We can't protect everything at the same level with the resources that we have. You could spend infinite resources protecting everything that you have, and we don't have infinite resources. So sometimes we have to make difficult decisions. Are we protecting our IP? Are we protecting our formulas for the seeds that we're using? Are we protecting processes for how we harvest and how we manage the distribution of the agriculture or the food that we have? Are we protecting information in our supply chain? What is the most important asset to protect, and how are we going to protect it? So it's identify, protect, detect. How do we know that there's been a problem, that we've got malware in our system or that we're breached? And then respond and recover. How are we going to respond if there is a breach? And how are we going to get back into operations? And so the NIST model is those 5 buckets: identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. And today we need to think about all 5 buckets, and we need to have a plan for all 5 buckets, because we want to be resilient. We don't want to just protect against the bad guys getting in. We want to have a plan for if they get in, or we tell most people when they get in, we can respond and recover quickly. And that's really the first step in thinking about How do you build a cybersecurity program for your business so that you can be resilient? What are you going to identify your assets? How are you going to protect things? How are you going to identify or detect if something bad is happening? How are we going to respond, and how are we going to recover? Lisa, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, my dog was trying to join the call. You know, all of that logically makes sense. Sounds good. We've got these 5 areas, but what are some specific examples? You know, for example, right now, a company I'm on the board for, we are forever getting an email saying the CEO is asking for us to go pick up gift cards. That's a favorite one. They just can't seem to spell the words right. And then there's the texts that are coming a lot more regularly now with your Amazon deliveries here, things they're trying to get you to click on. What are specific things, you know, we could be thinking about in our companies and individually to help?
Yeah, so the biggest vulnerability we see in cybersecurity is people. You know, we can put some technologies in place that protect our technologies. We can keep patching our technologies so that they're the most current. And actually, I often recommend as an action item to install patches quickly. When you see a patch for your software, for your technology, you want to install that quickly, because those patches are usually to shut down vulnerabilities. I personally hate it. Every time there's a new iPhone update, it completely destroys what I've been thinking and how I operate and where, you know, where the buttons are on my systems. But really, those patches are around closing vulnerabilities and making sure that our systems are even more secure. So that's one thing we can do, is install updates. But if we think that people are the biggest vulnerability, it usually comes in the things you just described, Lisa. Things like, you get an email that they want you to send gift cards, or you get an email saying, we've just charged your account $623. If this is an error, call this number. And you never even did the business in the first place. So you know you didn't spend $623. So you call the phone number, and before you know it, they're sucking you into a sob story, an urgency story, and they're trying to get you to give them your bank account information. And I've seen that kind of a ploy. People they're looking for any vulnerability that they can, and they're creating urgency, and they're creating a feeling of helplessness, that they are the only ones that can help you, and you got to do it quickly. They don't want you to stop and think. In fact, we've heard that the errors in the emails sometimes are on purpose, because if you see an error in the email, you're probably not the kind of person that's going to fall for the scam, because you're going to wonder what it is they're doing. But if you don't see the error in the email, you're more likely to be somebody who would fall for the scam, because you're not paying it that close of attention, or you don't have the attention to detail. And so you are more easily sucked into whatever it is. So we call those phishing emails, PHISH, phishing emails. And we've seen phishing emails expand to everything: phishing phone calls, phishing texts. We've even seen situations where they put a button on your screen somehow. And so one example that is really scary, actually, is a software that installs, it looks like a piece of lint on your screen. And when you go to wipe that lint away, you're actually activating a button that downloads malware. So, I mean, you think it up, the bad guys have already thought it up. That's what I'm saying. They're getting badder faster. So the best things we can do is number one, if you see something, investigate it somehow. If something looks a little off, trust your instinct and investigate it. Number two, we can build a culture of cybersecurity, and I'm happy to spend more time on that if you'd like. But we can propagate this sort of wariness. I wouldn't say fear, but wariness amongst all the people in our organization, our team, even our family, because you don't want some unsuspecting person to inadvertently open up a vulnerability and install malware in a system that will affect you. And we can keep patching everything that we've got. We can make sure that if there's a patch coming out, that we install that patch. And finally, what we can do is we can sort of stay alert. I know that at this point in the cybersecurity world, there's so many headlines that we're almost immune to them. Try really hard not to be immune to them. You know, try really hard to keep, if you see something, if you hear something, investigate it, talk it up with people, try to understand, will this affect me and how might it affect me? So there's some specific examples of things we can do.
You mentioned building a cyber culture. What does that look like? I think you're doing a lot of research on that right now.
I am. That's one of my primary areas of research. So we noticed a few years ago that people were commenting that their employees were big vulnerabilities for their cyber plans. No matter how many protections they put in place, it only takes one person to click on the wrong email to open up a vulnerability or install malware that could bring a whole system down. So we started looking at how are companies building what I call a culture of cybersecurity. The idea here is we want to drive cybersecure behaviors. We don't want you clicking on an email that you don't know. We don't want you clicking on a link that is unfamiliar. We don't want you wiping lint off a screen if that's the big vulnerability right now. So what is it we want you to do? Well, we have a list of behaviors we want to drive. And usually what we do is we train somebody. We put them through a training class. And training classes are only this much effective. They're important. They set the boundaries. They set the ground rules. They help people know that there might be something. But what they don't do is they don't generate behaviors. What generates a behavior is a value, an attitude, or a belief. If you think something's important, you're more likely to do it. If you have the value, if someone in your organization, if your customers or your suppliers really find cybersecurity important, you're more likely to have the attitude that you've got to be cyber secure. So it's really about changing values, attitudes, and beliefs. And once we decide that changing people's behaviors is about values, attitudes, and beliefs, then our management tools become how do we drive those values, attitudes, and beliefs? How do we change values? How do we change beliefs? And that's a whole different set of activities than training. We can change your values, your attitudes, and your beliefs by giving you lots of stories about how this might affect you personally. We can change your values, attitudes, and beliefs by rewarding you for doing good. We can make a hero out of people who do the right things. We can have consequences for people who do the wrong things. We can put together some kinds of situations where you get to chat about what are cybersecurity stories that other people have heard. And when people start talking about it and they shine light on these subjects, then it starts to change your attitude. Wow, this is something I need to pay attention to. Let me give you some specific examples. So these aren't in the agriculture world. I honestly haven't studied very many farms, although honestly, we'd love to. So if any of your folks listening today are interested, please get in touch. We'd love to talk about how you're thinking about cybersecurity and understand more about what's happening and how we can help the agricultural community be more cyber secure. But that said, in building a culture, we've seen things like making heroes out of people who do the right thing. One company, if you report a cybersecurity thing you saw, someone asking you for a credit card, like you mentioned earlier, Lisa, or somebody, a story that might be relevant, that might inspire people to do the right thing, then you get a little badge that you can put on your email saying that you're a cyber defender. One company we saw this being particularly effective is in a financial services firm with several thousand people, and they call themselves data defenders, because in their organization they understand about data, and defending their company against losing data is a big deal. And so they created a whole campaign around being a data defender. They even have a guy who wears a cape and wears a mask, and he's the data defender. And so they've turned it into something that's really relatable in their organization, and they reward people with little badges that say they're data defenders. So there's an example. Another example was in another bank, this cyber evangelist got a whole bunch of chocolate chip cookies, and he gave chocolate chip cookies out to people who reported, who found something. He put an exercise together, and all the people that participated got a chocolate chip cookie. So there was a motivation to participate. And this was before COVID, but he ran out of chocolate chip cookies so fast because everybody was motivated to do something just to get their chocolate chip cookie. And another thing is consequences. So there's an industrial control company. If you click on a phishing email, you have to take a short 15-minute class that reminds you not to click on a phishing email and tells you how to identify them and so forth. If you click on a phishing email after you've taken that class, so the second time you have to meet with your supervisor. The third time you have to meet with the HR person, and the fourth time you're fired. And you might say, well, we can't fire somebody because they click on phishing emails. That doesn't work in our environment. Well, it doesn't work in every environment. But in that particular case, clicking on a phishing email could install malware in an industrial system that could stop working or could cause a fire, or worse, cause injury or death. So they can't take a risk. They will not keep someone around if that person can't figure out to not click on phishing emails in a phishing exercise. So there's consequences. You can be sure in that environment, not very many people fail phishing exercises. So there are some rewards, there's some punishments, there's some making heroes out of people, sharing stories. I can tell you one other example. So, I mean, as you mentioned, I work at MIT, and I'm a research director. However, none of my friends are cybersecurity people. They're normal jobs like lawyers and doctors and manicurists and, stay-at-home moms and stay-at-home dads and, just normal people. But because I'm in cybersecurity, I talk it up a lot. I tell them about headlines I saw. I just talk it up just because I'm a nerd. And all of my friends are a little bit more secure because they hang out with me and I talk it up. I shine light on these things. And I mean, I'm not trying to make them cyber people, but because they hang out with someone who talks about it, they're all a little bit more aware of it and they're a little bit more safe. And when they notice something, they can come to me. I may not know anything about it, but we shine light on these. We don't let it happen in the darkness. And that's my point. You don't have to be a cyber expert to talk about cybersecurity. You read about it in the paper all the time. If you just talk about it with your family and friends and your teammates and your colleagues, everybody's going to be a little more secure just because we've shined light on the subject.
I'd love to go back to the data defender for just a minute, because data is such a huge part of the farming industry. So they're often capturing data on iPads, on the tractor, on the combine. This is a little bit away from pure your cybersecurity talk, but where do you store that safely? And how do you what do you do with all this data? We keep getting told to protect the data.
Yeah, so I'm not a technology data safety expert, so I can only tell you some things I've seen done. I can tell you what I personally do, and you're going to laugh. I back up my laptop is backed up 4 places, and I back it up on the cloud. I back it up in a little personal drive. I back it up with another protection software. And because I'm at MIT, there's an automatic backup system. So my system is backed up all over the place, because I'm fearful that if my system is corrupted, one of my backups might be corrupted also. So that's what I personally do. Now, is that advisable? I don't know. That's just what I do because I want to make sure that my data is available to me. What most companies do, most organizations, there are consultants that can help you put together a cybersecurity program and a data protection program. So if you're a small or medium business and you don't have a technology person that does this for you, you can talk to your insurance company. Oftentimes insurance companies have advisors for data security and data protection, in part because in many companies, it's becoming a liability and it's becoming an insurance issue. It's a risk issue. So they have people, many insurance companies have people that can advise you on the best protection for you. There's also all sorts of software that can help you do something like that. But when we think about data protection, what we want to think about, the reason this particular company, I think I use it as an example, is that most people would never argue that cybersecurity is important. Everybody would say, oh yeah, we got to be secure. But when I ask somebody, well, so what do you do? What would you do? They don't really know, because it doesn't dawn on them that protecting data might be key to cybersecurity. They just think locking up their systems, or they think protecting their passwords. So this particular company was so brilliant in changing the conversation from one of cybersecurity to one of data protection, which really drove home in everyone in the organization that now they have to think about, or they should think about, data and not just using it, but also protecting it. So that drove behaviors like not sharing data with people that they shouldn't share it with, making sure that they didn't leave their screens open when they walked away from their computer, making sure that they had locked up their system when they left for the day, or that they had changed their passwords on a regular basis, because those were things that in their world related to protecting data. So I don't know if I answered your question, but that's some of the ways that I've seen people think about that.
No, that helps. And I know it's a little off your core expertise, but was just kind of curious. All this conversation about things that we could be doing starts to make me think this could be costly. How much money do small to medium sized businesses typically spend to be secure, or how much money should they spend?
Yeah, that's a really hard question. And again, I haven't studied, I don't have statistics to point you to. I'm sure other people have looked at what is the cybersecurity spend of different kinds of businesses. It's just not something that I've studied. But it seems to me that, well, I personally would like to write the book that cybersecurity can be free, because I do think there are a number of things you can do to increase your cyber posture and to build a cybersecurity strategy that don't cost anything. For example, talking about it. It doesn't cost us anything for us to talk about cybersecurity and to bring it to light. One company that we looked at, they start all of their meetings with everyone in the company, they're all hands meetings, with a cybersecurity moment. And so their CEO, who's not a cyber person, just wants to make sure everybody's aware. And so everybody has the right attitude. And so he starts all his meetings with some sort of story or some sort of headline, or he brings in a cyber person to talk about some sort of story or some sort of headline. And that doesn't cost anything. So I think there are many things we can do that don't cost a lot of money that will help us build more secure organizations. But when it comes to spending, then we usually think about the physical protections we're putting in place, the software we're putting in place, the cyber evangelists that we need to help make sure that our organization is secure, the cyber leader that we hire to make sure that the technologies are in place. And now we're starting to look at, what is the overall spend for technology, and what part of that would you spend just to make sure your cybersecurity posture is high. And honestly, I don't know what that number looks like. I think you could spend every penny you wanted to spend. And so that's why it's so hard to answer that question. I think it's, there are companies who don't spend anything until they're breached, and then they can't spend enough. They just, so it's really, we're still in the Wild West to some extent when it comes to putting together cybersecurity programs. People just, they don't do it.
Yeah, you mentioned software spend. One of the questions that had come in advance is around passwords. We hear here and there that you shouldn't use the same password for everything. I'm guessing you may agree with that statement, but also there are all these softwares now being advertised that are password protection softwares. Does that come into play at all?
Oh, awesome. I'm glad you asked that question. Yes. So I'm going to tell you two stories, and then I'm going to give you my advice on this. So first story is I actually did a case study. It's published at Harvard Business Review on Yahoo, which used to be called Verizon Media. And Verizon spun out Yahoo. And the whole case study is about password protection. Their issue wasn't so much data leakage as credential capture. They were very worried that all the people in their organization might enter passwords or repeat passwords or have some sort of issue with their credentials and share their credentials inappropriately. And that would lead to a more wide scale set of vulnerabilities than they wanted to deal with. So there's a whole case study, Harvard Business Review, look up the study on Yahoo and you'll get their story and some of the ways they did it, some of the ways they managed it, and how a big company used password protection software or password protectors to build a stronger cybersecurity culture. So that's one story. The second story is around companies who, keeping passwords. So the leading thoughts on passwords is the longer the better. And the computer can't really tell the difference in the word mute, M-U-T-E, and the number 689 exclamation point. So if the computer is just going to try to break your password, it's going to try every character. And so it doesn't matter whether the characters together string together a word or something unintelligible. So I always find it funny when people enter a password that they can't even remember, because it doesn't matter to the computer whether you can remember it or not. It's the same vulnerability. What matters to them is how long. A longer password is much harder to break than a shorter password. So the prevailing thought is a passphrase or stringing together 5 or 6 words that you can remember. Like today is October 11th. That would be a really hard password for a system to break, as opposed to exclamation point 6952, which I can't even, you can't even remember that. So, so when you put passwords in place, my advice is longer and something that means something to you, but not something that is obvious, like not your kids' names and birthdays. That would not be a good password, even though it would be longer. So my advice is password protectors. Absolutely. I use one myself. The catch, of course, is that you only have to remember one password to get the vault to open. So you want to make that password pretty difficult. And that way you've protected the passwords behind it. Most of them have really high levels of encryption, and most of them are excellent ways to have multiple passwords or different passwords for each application. I personally have a password protector, but I do not use it for my bank accounts. I remember my bank account password. And that's just because I want to be hyper protected. I'm pretty sure that it's not going to be a problem if it's in a password protector, but for me, that's my most critical asset that I want to protect. And so I don't put my bank passwords in my password protector, but I do put everything else. And everyone has a different password, and I no longer have to remember all those passwords. All I have to remember is the one password to get into the vault. So yes, use a password protector.
Okay, great. One other thing I wanted to go back to is just a little on the tech side is, cloud storage. Everyone loves to talk about cloud now. Does cloud storage make you more exposed? Is it safer? Is there a perspective you'd give on using the cloud?
Yeah, really good question. So I know for many medium and small businesses and even large businesses, the cloud is a platform that is very useful and very important and not going away. And many of us think that the stuff we put in the cloud is more secure because we put it in the cloud. And the question is, who manages the security of your stuff in the cloud? So we'd like to think that the cloud provider is managing the security of the stuff we put in the cloud. But just as I say that, you're smiling, that they're not going to manage your data in the cloud. They're going to manage the platform. They're going to make sure the platform is more secure. But there's a bunch of controls that you can turn on and off, and you have to set those controls. And even if you go with the default, you've made that decision. And if your data or your application in the cloud is compromised, most cloud contracts don't cover that. So you still have to manage your security in the cloud. It's just different. You first of all, it's not physical. You don't have it in front of you. It's not a data center that's on your premise. And second of all, you have to now manage it through the controls that the cloud provider provides. So my advice to people is definitely use the cloud. Definitely, if that's the way you outsource your IT, do it. But be aware that just because you put something in the cloud doesn't mean it's secured by your cloud provider. Read your contracts, make sure you know what's covered, and make sure you know how to protect your things in the cloud. What are the controls? Now, if we ratchet that up to a company with multiple clouds, somebody using perhaps Amazon and Microsoft and Google, they're using all the clouds, know that the controls are different in each cloud. So instead of diversifying into multiple clouds being more secure, you are more secure because you have multiple locations. But the security that you have to do has now tripled because you have to understand how to secure your stuff in each cloud. So cloud security, yes, cloud platform, probably secure, but your application and your data, maybe not, because you're in the cloud. You have to really look at what instance you have and what your contracts look like.
Contracts are a great point. That's something that I think we all just click on the agree to terms, just so you can hurry up and get through the software installation, but you're raising a great point to pause and read that. So we've talked a lot about, how you might prevent this, but let's be real, just like you opened it, most people put a security alarm in after they've had someone break in. So let's say one of our farms gets hit by a cyber attack. What do you do?
Yeah. What do you do? Wow. Well, first thing to do is not panic. The first thing you're going to do is panic, but the first thing to do is not panic. So let me say that everybody listening to this webinar, you should take a minute, take a few minutes and think about what is your response and recovery plan now before you've been hit. So right now, you haven't been hit, you don't have a security issue. Now is the time to think about what is your plan. Because when you're in the middle of the crisis, it's really hard to stop and say, what do I do? So everybody on this call will be more prepared because they now know that they should take a few minutes, do a tabletop exercise, do a planning session, and be prepared. And we can talk about how to do that in a minute. You didn't ask me that question, but that's what I want everybody to take away from this, is to be more prepared because you're hearing us talk about it now. But let's suppose you didn't hear this and you've been hit. Now, what do you do? So first thing that you do is you try to reach out to the authorities. The authorities in your area could be government authorities, it could be FBI, could be your local police. Many of these authorities have cyber divisions now, and they can help you sort through what to do. It used to be people were afraid to call the authorities because they were afraid they were reporting something and it was going to hit their reputation, that they were compromised, and that might impact their business. But the truth of the matter is that most authorities have information that would be, on the balance, more useful than the potential problem you would have if you didn't contact the authorities. So contact your authorities. They may have seen the ransomware or the problem that you've encountered. They may have solutions that other people have used. They may even have resources to help you get over it. Depends what it is that you've been hit with. The other resource that I tell people to talk to is their insurance companies. Again, insurance companies aren't cyber professionals, but many of them have either developed that capability or have a cyber arm now that can help you with it. And the third set of resources to use are cyber vendors. So again, if you're hit, if it's something you have in the cloud, your cloud vendor may have recommended cyber vendors that they could recommend. There are plenty of cyber vendors online, whether they're consultants or whether they're companies that can help try to diagnose what the problem was and fix it. I would say, especially right now, because it's an important season for agriculture, and you don't want to take any time to have to go and fix a problem. You're harvesting right now, or you're planting in the spring, and you just got to do that work. You've got a finite window of time. But I wouldn't pay the ransom if it's a ransomware attack. I would explore it first. Even if it's just for a day, I would explore it first, because there's a good chance that if you pay the ransom, you set yourself up for increased vulnerabilities. There's some people that believe that companies that pay ransom put a more pronounced target on their back because they're known as companies that pay ransom. And if you pay a ransom and these guys are trying to get ransom, then you're basically saying, I pay the ransom, do this again to me. So you don't want to do that unless that's really your last resort. So I would say start with your cyber vendors. If you have them, start with your technology vendors, go to your local authorities, and go to your insurance company. All of those are potential resources for you.
You mentioned insurance company, and this one just had popped in my head. We hear a lot about cyber insurance now for businesses. And I also hear it's gotten outrageously expensive. Where do you land on needing or exploring cyber insurance?
I definitely think you want to explore it. I think you want to take a look and see what the insurance is that's available to you given your business. It's a business risk. So managing cyber is like managing most other business risks. The difference is that the potential cost of the risk, it can be so high that it's unmeasurable. You don't know. You just don't know what the potential risk is. Is it a ransomware for $100 million or for $10,000? Obviously $10,000 is a lot more reasonable, and you might pay it because that's more reasonable than $100 million. So we just don't know, and insurance companies don't know. They don't know what they're signing up for when they give you cyber insurance, and that's why cyber insurance is so questionable right now. They just don't know what the liability is, and so they limit it. And so in many cases, the liability doesn't really even cover what you need. However, because insurance companies have these policies and have the potential to potentially pay companies or help companies navigate through a ransomware or other cyber attack. They have arms that help their clients with a cyber attack. So it might be worth investigating some insurance, not just for the insurance itself, but for the expertise that the company might be able to offer you as you respond or recover from a cyber attack. So I think there's two things to look at. One is, what is the insurance and are you ever going to get it? Most companies I've talked to, I ask if they have insurance, and they do, and they have to. It's a compliance thing. But I ask them if they've ever used it, and they say no, and we never expect to, because we're never going to be able to recover enough from insurance. So we just have to pay for it. It's a cost of business.
Yeah, like paying for car insurance. You haven't, knock on wood, hopefully you never use it, but boy,
Yeah.
you're going to want it.
Yeah.
Huh. You know,
And some people get car insurance because the dealer network that will fix your car. You know, I mean, so that's what I'm saying here. There's part of it is having the insurance, but part of it is the relationships the insurance companies have that might help you mitigate a problem. So that's a really great example.
Perfect. Well, you know, we've spent a good bit of time talking about, you know, our own business and individuals. But the reality is every one of these businesses has a whole supply chain they deal with. And, you know, the past couple of years in particular, between, you know, the problems getting fertilizer, being able to ship crops wherever, has just, supply chains have really come to the forefront. And I think you're doing a current project on supply chain cybersecurity. You know, what do the businesses really need to be thinking about here?
Yes, we are doing some research, and that would be an excellent opportunity for some of your businesses to plug in with us. We really are looking for some businesses in the agriculture space to help us understand the supply chain cyber issues. So we would love to talk to more companies about this. In general, the supply chain issues, particularly with small and medium businesses, are kind of an extension of what we talked about so far, which is, you know, small and medium businesses may not have the resources to be as protected as they need to be. And we're seeing increased vulnerability from the supply chain. Many of the more recent headlines have occurred because a company in the supply chain was unprotected in some way, and that introduced a vulnerability, or in some cases malware, into a company's systems. The famous example was a long time ago with Target and their air conditioning vendor, who came in and plugged into the systems, had a password to get into the systems to remotely manage their AC systems, and inadvertently introduced malware. But even more recently than that, we saw an example where a company, SolarWinds, had software that's used in many companies in their systems, and their software was fine, but right at the last minute, the bad guys, the hackers, knew the process, introduced malware into the install program, not the software, but the install program. And that, of course, hadn't been checked, and so it went viral. It went around to all the customers, and 18,000 companies got hacked because they used the install program that had the malware in it. So the bad guys are always coming up with a new way to get into our systems. And supply chain seems to be the choice du jour. It's the choice today of how to get into systems. So, so my advice, first of all, as a small and medium business, check with some of the companies that you do business with. They may have cyber resources to help you be secure, because some of the larger companies need to or want to do business with you, and they have resources for cyber, and they may be able to help you build a stronger, more robust cyber program. And that's a project we're looking at today. So that's, again, something we'd love to talk to more agricultural companies about. The second piece is many larger organizations are burdening the small and medium businesses with a cyber evaluation process. It could be a checklist. It could be, you know, some sort of document, some sort of survey, some sort of evaluation that is very resource intensive. And the small medium business doesn't even have, not only do you not know the answers to half the questions, but you don't even have the resource to go investigate. Like, they want to know what your policy is on data protection, or they want to know what your plan is in the event of a cyber attack. And you may not even have those plans in place. So, so we're finding in our research that there's a disconnect between what small and medium businesses can do and what their supply chains are asking them to do. So I don't have an answer for all that right now, but what we're seeing is an awareness, which is great first step, of this disconnect. And we're trying to investigate what's the right way for small and medium, for the supply chain cyber to work. What is the right way to evaluate if your supply chain is secure and where the vulnerabilities are in your supply chain? So those are the big questions today. How do you evaluate your supply chain? How do you evaluate your suppliers? And how do you make sure that their vulnerabilities don't become your nightmare?
That is great advice. Thank you. It gets really scary to a whole nother level when you know all this around you. You've got to start helping to figure out as well. Michael, any questions you can think of that I haven't asked so far that may be really helpful to bring into the conversation?
The one thing I was going to ask really is, as this becomes more important, it seems like there's an area, and maybe somebody's already doing it, to actually help small and medium-sized businesses with this type of process. Being in academics, I see the process at a university where they want to make sure everybody's aware of these phishing attempts, and you have to do the testing, every 3 months or every 6 months, or like Keri said, if you actually fall for a phishing attempt, then you get put on the list. But is there a company out there yet at this point in time that is actually providing those kinds of services that small businesses can sign up for and pay for? Has that happened yet? And what do you think, will that happen in the future to make it a little easier on the smaller companies? Instead of having to hire IT people to do this job for them, they can actually subscribe to a service that does this.
So, there's multiple levels to your question, Michael. I think one part of your question is there sort of a chief information security officer for hire service, as a service? And the answer is yes. I know people who have spun up businesses like that.
Okay.
Where you could hire a part of a CISO, so it's sort of like we saw that in the IT world, where you could, if you didn't need a full-time information officer, CIO, you could work with a company and get a service where you got a piece of a CISO. And we're seeing that happen with the management part of it. So that's not a bad idea for a small and medium business. Find a company, probably, I don't know one offhand. I know people that have done this and they've spun up companies, but I'm always hesitant to recommend a specific company. I'm an academic and I'm pretty independent in terms of companies, but there are companies doing that. But the second piece of your question is around, well, two more pieces. One is around the phishing and, the testing of your people. And there are companies that do that also. So there are many companies that even the large companies use, and they buy a service that comes in and does phishing tests. And they do the phishing tests and they report back to you how many people failed it. And they'll even do the 15-minute video that teaches people how to recognize a phishing test. So those companies exist. But the third piece of your question is more about, I think, about services. If you don't have the service, if you don't have the people that can actually be your cybersecurity team, then what services can you hire or bring in that will do that for you? And that's a trickier question because there's a whole mosaic of things you want to do. You want to make sure your identity and access management systems are in place, that nobody can get into your systems that aren't supposed to, that the identity is, that's like passwords, but also logins and things like that. You want to make sure when people come and go, those things are added or subtracted. There's a whole access management piece. There's a whole security operations piece. How do we make sure that our systems haven't been penetrated? That we don't detect any malware. And the answer is all of those. There are services for all of those. I don't know any comprehensive, all-encompassing everything service like the NIST model in a service, but I don't know of any of those. I'm sure somebody's thinking about that. But consulting firms are always at the forefront here. So again, it might be more expensive than the average farm or small business could afford, but there are consultants who will come in and help you put together and tinker together the different tools to build that quilt, if you will, that will provide for you the basic services of cybersecurity protection. and detection. And that would be an awesome way to start if you have nothing. You know, start with a consultant that could be a part-time CISO for you, or start with one of these part-time CISO services and let somebody give you the plan and recommend the software as a service that would be useful for you. So the answer is yes, all those services are available. I should tell you one other bad news though. The bad guys also have services available to them. So the bad guys aren't necessarily the hooded, tattooed, pierced people sitting in the corner in a dark room typing on their computers. They're people like you and me that have bad morals. You know, if I wanted to become a hacker, I don't have to know the first thing about hacking. I just have to want to do it. And then I can go buy all the services to do it. We actually wrote a paper about this for Sloan Management Review, cyber attacks as a service. So this just means that the attack business is just as innovative as the protection business. And that's why you don't want to leave this any longer, because if you haven't done anything today, that's not the best situation to be in. But the good news is you now know that you should take steps to do something, because that business is only growing and it's going to continue to grow because it's profitable for the people that are in it. And we want to make sure everybody on this call at least puts some sort of plan in place to protect themselves.
Okay, thank you.
Wow. So we are hitting time, and I think, you know, you just left us with one thing in particular that is a great parting piece of advice, which is get moving if you have not been addressing this area. Any other parting thoughts you would share, Keri, before we sign off?
I think my parting advice to people is usually be the change. I mean, I know that sounds really trite. Be the change you want to see. Cybersecurity is everybody's issue now. It's not just your technology people's issue. So everybody has a role appropriate set of activities to do, set of behaviors to do. So let's jump in. Don't be afraid of it. Figure out a role appropriate set of activities for you to do, whatever your role is. If you own the company, then you're the leader setting an example. If you work for somebody, then you want to make sure that they understand the vulnerabilities. Be the person that helps them feel that this is something they can tackle. If you're you know, a low-level person in an organization, you have a role to play also. You know, don't click on a phishing email. Report what you see. Be the change that will help your company be safer, because I think there's a role appropriate action for all of us. And I hope that by listening to these examples today, you found one or two things that would be useful for you to jump in and do.
Well, I know I've got a whole list. I need to go back at my computer, so we should probably wrap the call. But Keri, thank you so much. And Michael, I'll turn it back to you.
On behalf of the Executive Farm Management Program, I'd like to thank Lisa and Keri for the timely and informational seminar that they just gave. I've got some information up here. If you're interested in learning more about the Executive Farm Management Program, we're going to be having the program in January and February of 2023. And you can contact me or go to the website, either one, and learn more about the program. And we've also got 2 more seminars that are coming up about family planning and year-end taxes. Check out the website for the dates and the times for those 2 seminars this fall. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us.